Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Luke Fickell, the Wisconsin Badgers continue to do a very nice job in the transfer portal, landing the commitment from former USC linebacker Tackett Curtis. And Tackett Curtis is a guy that we've talked extensively over the 12 months as being a young linebacker at USC who, flashed every single physical trait that you want in an all-conference linebacker. Just as a true freshman, seemed a little lost that time, seemed like the game was going very fast, but there is a reason Tackett Curtis garnered so much interest out of the transfer portal because what he flashed from a physical standpoint is really, really exciting. And a lot of USC fans, listen, I got my USC sweatshirt on right now. We've talked Tackett Curtis, and we were really excited about the development that Tackett Curtis could have, but that USC defensive coaching staff just kind of thrusted him out there a little bit too early. He wasn't quite ready for that moment. Tackett Curtis for Wisconsin, if he puts it together on the football field, could be a very special linebacker. Really excited to talk about what Tackett Curtis brings to this Wisconsin team. And I want to do a little recap on what Wisconsin is doing, in the transfer portal, as I'm a massive fan of what Luke Fickell has been bringing in over the last couple of weeks. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. It has been just an absolute blast covering all of these commitments out of the transfer portal, and the amount of support you guys have shown the boys. It really does mean a lot. Something I love doing. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into Tackett Curtis. And again, a lot of the USC fans who will be listening to this know how I feel about Tackett Curtis, a guy that we've talked about a lot as being somebody who has all-conference potential at that linebacker position and played a lot of football for USC, over 40 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. The conversation I want to have most with Tackett Curtis is the development that needs to take place between the ears. And this is a guy that flies around the football field, hits extremely physically, and a guy that from a physical tools standpoint kind of checks off all the boxes that you want in this modern linebacker at the college football level. A guy that just when you watched him play at USC as a true freshman, you could kind of tell that the game was fast for him, right? Not filling the right gaps, not being the best in those run fits, and not really diagnosing what was happening in front of him. That being said, that type of stuff can happen. That can take place. Like that development can take place with more reps, with more development. And a lot of USC fans know this. That was a defensive coaching staff that wasn't exactly known for getting the best out of the players on the defensive side of the football. Tackett Curtis hits the transfer portal, and there's a reason he's the number 2 linebacker available in the portal. One, he's only going into his second year of college football, but more importantly, from a physical standpoint, this is a guy that can do pretty much everything you want a linebacker to do. He has the speed and athleticism to go sideline to sideline, was a former safety at high school, but also a guy that between the tackle box, when you're facing some of those Big Ten offenses that want to be physical, this is a guy that can take on blocks, stack and shed, and make tackles. It just needs to come together for him a little bit more. I am a massive Tackett Curtis fan, even though back to his times at USC where you saw those growing pains. And Luke Fickell, a coach that has been an expert in terms of player development, going back to his time at Cincinnati, is getting a ball of clay, if you will. A guy that has everything you want in a linebacker. And if you can kind of put that together, get the between the ears stuff right, I think you're getting a really, really good linebacker. Now, what makes me even more excited about Tackett Curtis coming to Wisconsin was you wanted a little bit more athleticism out of your linebackers, right? There were times when you watch Wisconsin, they struggle to operate in space. Some of those linebackers very, very good in the box, taking on blocks, making tackles between the tackle box. But when you ask them to go tackle a running back in the flat, carry a tight end up the seam, the athleticism wasn't quite there for Wisconsin in that linebacker room. So what do you go out and do? You go out and get 2 linebackers in Jem Thomas and Tackett Curtis who have all the athleticism upside in the world. And what I love even more about this situation is Jem Thomas is a veteran linebacker coming over from Arkansas, obviously spent some time with Luke Fickell at Cincinnati, who has over 185 tackles in his career, had 90 tackles for Arkansas last year in the SEC. About as experienced as it gets, right? 6'4", 250, a phenomenal athlete, that can go sideline to sideline, can be an asset in coverage, but more importantly, an experienced linebacker. And if you're going to play Tackett Curtis right next to him, he has a guy that he can look to and say, all right, well, like, get me help, I guess, mentor me, get me in the plays, get me know what I'm doing on the defensive side of the football. Pairing Tackett Curtis up with a linebacker like Jem Thomas, who's played a ton of football, is familiar with what Luke Fickell and this defensive coaching staff wants to do back at his time at Cincinnati, I think it's going to be a massive asset for Tackett Curtis. And you all of a sudden look at this linebacker room for Wisconsin and say, this is a room that's gotten massively upgraded, right? You add Jem Thomas, you add Tackett Curtis, you add Sebastian Cheeks, all guys that have all the traits that you really want with these linebackers. Now you got to get them developed, but the athleticism in this linebacker room for Wisconsin heading into that 2024 year is extremely exciting. And you take a look at what Wisconsin has done in the transfer portal as a whole. I mean, Ronald Delancey coming over from Toledo, you take a look at his numbers from that MAC level. And again, Luke Fickell, a ton of success going back to his time at Cincinnati, taking guys from the group of 5 level in the transfer portal at Cincinnati, kind of finding those diamonds in the roughs, even in the high school recruiting class. Ronald Delancey played some really good football for Toledo, only faced 25 targets, but only gave up 10 catches, 8 forced incompletions. I mean, 8 forced incompletions to 10 catches is a phenomenal ratio for a guy like Ronald Delancey, who I think can make that step to the Power 5 level. You get Tyree Walker, a guy that we already talked about, who I think fits exactly what what Wisconsin wants to do on the offensive side of the football in terms of a really, really thick lower half, a guy that can take on contact, run between the tackles, and you continue to scroll down and say, you like these additions that they're bringing in, right? Tyler Van Dyke, an extremely high upside quarterback. Tyrell Henry, somebody who can make things happen with the football in his hands. And then you go to the FCS level and get a guy like John Pius, who was one of the most productive players in all of college football at the FCS level. Like, Wisconsin is upgrading this roster in multiple different departments. Now, the one position I would like to see Wisconsin maybe add another name is probably that wide receiver room, right? And you look at what Will Pauling did for Wisconsin, massive, massive playmaker for Wisconsin, but it always felt like watching Wisconsin and watching back some of the film that Will Pauling was it. And if it wasn't Will Pauling getting the targets, there wasn't really many wide receivers that were emerging and making plays. And you saw some glimpses of some young cats in that bowl game against LSU show some upside. If I'm Wisconsin and I want to kind of commit to this Phil Longo offense, you probably want to get a few more playmakers in that wide receiver room. But you look at Luke Fickell and what this program is doing in the transfer portal, it's a program that's going in the right direction. And there were some obvious growing pains. And I think going back, 6 months before this season started, and there was a lot of optimism around this Wisconsin program, year one under Luke Fickell. And I think a lot of people didn't recognize the significant changes that were happening within this program. I mean, going from Paul Christ and how that offense was to Luke Fickell and Phil Longo, there were going to be some growing pains. This was a program that was going to go through some massive changes from a schematic standpoint. And you recruited out of high school to fit what Paul Christ wanted to do on offense. And all of a sudden, within 1 year, you're trying to go to that Phil Longo offense. And the personnel wasn't quite there. I don't think the team necessarily grasped that offense to a full extent, but year 2, that's when I think you really start to see this team kind of take that next step, especially on the offensive side of the football. Got to be patient with Luke Fickell. And I get it was a year where it was underwhelming, but Luke Fickell's a winner. And I think he's doing a phenomenal job in the transfer portal, getting this program where it needs to be from a personnel standpoint to match what they want to do from a schematic standpoint. Really excited about what Wisconsin is doing in the transfer portal, and a guy like Tackett Curtis. USC fans, let him know in the comment section your thoughts on Tackett Curtis, because he's a guy that I think we all agree that the upside is just so high for a guy like Tackett Curtis. Can't wait to see what he develops to with the Wisconsin Badgers. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Been having a blast updating all of these commitments. Appreciate y'all rocking with us, and we'll talk to y'all later.